This is FYI on your TV, brought to you by Hometown News. I'm Kathy Botham. I have got my history teacher back with me, Doug Phillips. Thanks for joining us again.
You're welcome.
And once again, I'm learning more. I've done my homework.
Well, good. You said last time that when I mentioned this person's name, you said you wrote it down, and you did your homework. What did you find out about Oliver Avison?
Well, I learned that he was born in England.
Yes.
He spent a lot of time here in Smith Falls.
Very good.
And he moved to Korea.
Very good.
And then he's actually buried here in Smith Falls too.
That's right.
So I'm going to let you fill in the blanks.
That's the highlight. That's really the highlights, or some of the important groundwork for his life. Yes, Oliver Avison was born in England. His family moved to Canada. His father was a superintendent at a woolen mill in Almont, and he graduated from Almont High School. And his first job after he graduated from high school, he taught in a public school just a couple of miles outside Smith Falls. It was called Hutton Public School. It's off Highway 29. The building is still there. It's a stone building. It's now a private residence. He taught there for 3 years, but he decided probably teaching in a one-room school maybe wasn't for him. So he moved into Smith Falls, and he got a job as an apprentice to a local pharmacist, a Dr. McCollum, very prominent person in Smith Falls at that time. He worked for Dr. McCollum as an apprentice for 3 years, and then he went off to the University of Toronto and became a pharmacist. He took I think 2 or 3 years to become a pharmacist. He was rather top of his class, but he stayed on and he went to medical school. So he was both a pharmacist and a doctor. And when he graduated, he stayed on at the University of Toronto as a lecturer in medicine, I think. I don't know too much about his pharmacy career after he got his medical degree. He had a thriving medical practice in Toronto, as well as being a lecturer. But he was also a very devout Christian. And one time, a recruiter came to the University of Toronto and looking for doctors who would go off to Korea and help bring Western medicine to Korea. And so Dr. Avison gathered some of his senior students, likely candidates, young men, and this recruiter gave a talk about what he was looking for. And after it was over, Dr. Avison and this other person were talking about likely candidates, and the recruiter turned to Dr. Avison and said, "What about you?" So he was 33 years old. He had a wife and 3 children. He was teaching at the University of Toronto, and he had a thriving medical practice in Toronto. He was sitting pretty, but he gave it all up to go off to Korea, a land of which he knew nothing. And he spent the next 43 years in Korea.
His faith.
His faith is what motivated him. He went over. He was sponsored by the Presbyterian Church. He was a part of their mission outreach to Korea. The Presbyterian Church was very active in missionary work in Korea. But when he was there, at the time he was there was an outbreak of cholera. And it was ravaging the country, and Dr. Avison introduced some Western techniques like isolation and some other things that helped to bring down the cholera epidemic. He was known as the man who conquered the epidemic in Korea.
Wow.
Yeah. He was the doctor to the king of Korea for several years. But more important than that, I think we should emphasize that Dr. Avison wasn't there just to provide medical services. He wanted to establish institutions that would survive him. His first effort was the state of hospitals was very poor. He also, every 7 years, he came back to North America on either a furlough or a sabbatical, a combination of the two, I think. And part of that, his year off, was to go around and raise money. And in 1900, he was at a conference of missions in New York City, and he gave his talk about his work in Korea and what he was trying to do. And he attracted the attention of a man named Louis Severance from Cleveland, Ohio. And Mr. Severance approached Dr. Avison after the meeting and he agreed to help fund this hospital. So that's how the Severance Hospital in Seoul, Korea started. It was through Dr. Avison's efforts and the money provided by a man named Louis Severance. And it's still there today.
Still there,
Still there. But okay, so he established the hospital, and the next step, even before he established the hospital, he had drawn up a curriculum to train nurses and doctors in Korea. It wasn't just the hospital. Hospital was a means of he had the hospital, but they had to get staff. Well, he didn't want to rely upon people coming from overseas, so he drew up a curriculum, and so he established the Severance Medical College over a number of years. Now, I must emphasize, he wasn't the only person doing this, or other people involved, but he definitely was the leader. Somebody said he spearheaded a lot of these projects, and so he introduced medical training to Korea. The first graduating class, I'm not sure if for nurses and doctors, the first graduating class, I'm not sure if it was for nurses or doctors, was in 1908. But they provided over the years, they provided a lot of staff for the hospitals. When another thing about Dr. Oliver Avison, he was how to put this? When he retired from one of his positions, one of his sons, Douglas, was also a doctor, and Douglas he thought he might succeed his father as the head of the hospital. But Oliver Avison did not appoint his son as the head of the hospital. He appointed one of the doctors who he had trained, one of the local doctors who he had trained. Wow. So he created institutions that survived him. He was involved, I mentioned, in the Severance Medical School. There was also another medical school called the Chosun Medical School that he was involved in. He was not the first president, he was the second president. But those two hospitals, after the war, they merged to become Yonsei University, which is still around.
It's still around.
In the 1930s, the people in Korea, they erected a bronze statue to Dr. Avison on the grounds of the medical school, on the grounds of the hospital, I think. The bronze statue was there until the Second World War, when the Japanese melted it down to make bullets. But in 1966, it was re-erected by the people in Korea. And in 1985, some Korean doctors who had trained at his schools, they approached the University of Toronto to see if they could erect a memorial to Dr. Avison and two other people who were instrumental in the forming of the medical schools. And so on the grounds of Victoria College at Toronto, there is they call it a pagoda shape. To me, it looks more like an obelisk. It's a vertical structure. It's not like a tombstone. It's a vertical structure. And on the base, there are the names of three people, two doctors, one from Nova Scotia. I can't remember where the other person is from, but two doctors who worked at the Severance Hospital for many years, and Dr. Oliver Avison, who was its founder. Okay. So when he was home on these sabbaticals every year, he came back to Smiths Falls.
He was married to a lady from Smiths Falls.
Well, you're stealing my thunder.
Oh, sorry.
Why did he come back to Smiths Falls?
Oh.
Well, because when he was working at Dr. McCollum's drugstore, he met a local lady. Her father was I read the reeve or the mayor. I'm not sure which one. I know Francis Frost was the first mayor, so before that they would have had a reeve of some sort. I don't know if the exact date of it when this lady's father was a prominent citizen, but her name was Margaret Jane Burns, and she was called Jenny, and he married Jenny Burns. They had 10 children, and 7 of them survived infancy. Some of them, at least one of them or 2 of them, became doctors. But they went off to careers, but they came back every furlough, every 7 years. They came back to Israel because she had family connections here. Her family was still here. When Dr. Avison had to leave Korea in 1935, when the Japanese were invading, they told all foreigners to get out. So he retired. He and Jenny moved to Florida. Now, Jenny died in 1936. They were on a trip visiting some friends up in Cape Cod, and she died in 1936, shortly after they came back to Canada. He stayed in Florida. He lived in St. Petersburg until 1956. He lived till he was 96 years old.
Yes, I know.
Yeah,
I was doing the math there, and
Yeah.
that's quite an age for
Yeah,
that time.
And when he died, his body was cremated, and it was flown up to Canada, and two of his sons met the ashes at the airport, and his ashes were brought to Smiths Falls, and there was a visitation at Amy's funeral home. It's now Blair's, and the person who told me some of this part of the story was somebody John Joint. Oliver Avison is John Joint's great uncle.
Wow, still connected to
So
Smiths
there's
Falls.
still connection.
Still
And John
connections.
Joint, one of the people I talked to before I came on here, I contacted John Joint, and he had some information he could give me that I wasn't aware of. But one point I want to mention, one of his doctors who succeeded him as president wrote a biography of Oliver Avison. And here's what he said. He was a man of untiring energy and dedicated spirit. He impressed his listeners with his dynamic personality. He was tolerant toward all, but was a disciplinarian in all organized behaviors. He was our energetic leader who served his God by serving the Korean people. I think that's a pretty nice thing to say about somebody.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Very nice. Very nice. Yes. Well, I thank you
And
very
that's
much for coming here and telling us about Dr. Oliver Avison. Avison.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's right.
Avison.
Yeah,
Yes. Just the connections that we have with some amazing people here in Smiths Falls, and you know so much about.
Well, the way I found out about him, I was out at Hillcrest many years ago and looking for another person that I will be talking about later on, I think.
Absolutely.
And I said in the office there was a chart. Probably it's all digitized now, but there was a chart on the wall. And so he showed me where this person I was looking for was. And I said to him, sort of off the cuff, I said, "Is there anybody else who's kind of interesting?" He said, "Well, there's this guy that diplomats from the Korean embassy have been up here to see more than once." I said, "Oh, really?" So that's how I found out. That's how I first found out anything about Oliver Avison, by going up to Hillcrest looking for somebody else's tombstone.
Another connection.
Another
connection.
Yeah.
But you're going to come back and talk about that person?
I will.
Okay. All right. We
Okay.
will look forward to it. Well, I thank you very much for coming here today,
Okay.
and continuing to tell us about the connections to great people here in Smiths Falls.
Well,
and
it's a pleasure.
we need to get
Yeah.
the stories out there.
Yeah, that's right. I'm sure any small town has stories like that. I like to find out stories about Smiths Falls.
Hence you being a history teacher,
That's
right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Thank you very much for being
Yeah.
here. Mr. Phillips, Mr. Doug Phillips,
Yeah.
my history teacher from SFDCI. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you very much.